How many of you remember the TV show, Gilligan's Island? Oh, we got a few. How many of you are too young to remember Gilligan's Island? Oh, look at that. For those of you on Zoom, it was Turner's, Joe and Kate. Go to YouTube, play a couple little clips so that you can get the full experience that we all had. Now, in short, the show is about these 7 people who are on a 3-hour tour in the Pacific, and they get shipwrecked on this uncharted island with almost no hope of getting rescued. And week after week after week, they try different ways to get rescued. And of course, it always fails. And it's a ridiculous show, it really is. And the critics all said it would never last because it was too silly and too stupid. However, they had it running for 3 seasons, almost 100 episodes, and then it was syndicated. So by the time I was 10, 11, 12 years old, it was on every single day after school. So I've probably watched all 98 or so episodes of Gilligan's Island. I'm not proud of that. I'm just telling you, we only had 2 stations on our TV back then. So you were on 3 or you were on 8. That was your choice. So we watched a lot of Gilligan's Island. Now, what happens in that show is that this group of people have to work together, and they're constantly asking themselves questions like, how are we going to reach the outside world? How did we get here in the first place? How did we even wind up here? How do we work together? How do we survive? How do we get off this island? How do we go back to our normal lives after all of this has happened to us? And that question, how, is so important. The creator of the show said, it's not just all silly and stupid, it answers the question that all humanity needs to ask. How does a group of people from diverse backgrounds with diverse characteristics work together so that we can survive? You didn't know it was about something so deep, did you? We all loved it because it was silly and stupid, and because they're constantly asking the question, how? How do we get off this island? Now, in our reading today from the book of Lamentations, that author is also asking how. In fact, the name of that book in Hebrew is not Lamentations. It is how. That's the name of the book that our reading came from today. And how is a question the author poses again and again. Now, this is a dark book. It's deep. It's all about grief. It's only 5 chapters long, but it's heavy reading. So if you need a pick-me-up today, do not go home and read Lamentations, or you will be a puddle on the floor. There's not much hope in it, but it is set up beautifully. This little book, 5 chapters, follows this intricate pattern that I think looks a little bit like a wave. Chapters 1 and 2 are both 22 verses long. And there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and each verse begins with a different letter. So the first verse starts with what we would call A, the second verse starts with B, and so on until all the Hebrew characters are used up. Chapter 2 builds on chapter 1, same thing. 22 verses, every single verse starts with a consecutive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's really a work of art. Chapter 3 is the climax, or if it were a wave, it's the peak of that wave. And it is not 22 verses long, it is 66 verses long. It is 3 times longer than chapter 1 or chapter 2. And the first 3 verses start with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And the second 3 verses start with the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. I mean, somebody spent a serious amount of time wordsmithing this to make it fit the pattern. And then almost in the middle, the center of the book, we are at the crest of the wave in chapter 3, where Gary read for us today, therefore I have hope. You can imagine that you're at the top of the wave and you get a gulp of air and you gulp in hope, and then the wave starts to crash back down again. Chapter 4, we're back to 22 verses in the acrostic pattern, A, B, C, D, all the way through the Hebrew alphabet. And in chapter 4, the author of this book is getting mad. At first, they're crying. Look, God, look what happened to us. How did this happen? How did we get here? How could all of this be happening to us right now? We get that gulp of hope, and then we start to go down the wave, and we say something like, they need to pay. Come on, God, get those people over there that did this, because this is not good for us. And then after that point, chapter 5 kind of fizzles out. It's still 22 verses, but the acrostic dissipates. And it's just like a wave that finally hits the beach, and now it's just foam. It's gone. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of poetry, and it is all about grief. It's all about crying out in our grief. Now, grief comes from many different sources. Last week we talked about it when we followed Naomi through leaving her home and her family and everything she knows and losing her husband and her children and then trying to push her daughters-in-law away. And we know that every time we have any kind of change in our lives, we have grief. It comes with change. We don't separate it. When our children graduate and they go off to college, we celebrate for them, don't we? Because they're making this move into adulthood, but at home we're grieving because they're not leaving their shoes out for us to trip on anymore. Their laundry isn't piled up all over, and the house feels like it shrunk or grew. It's grief, and it manifests differently in different people at different times. Now, just to get an idea of where we all are in grief, just over the church, not looking beyond the church for this little illustration here, how many of you can remember a time when Westminster Presbyterian was full of people, when you had a nursery and Sunday school classes and lots of potlucks and all the things? How many? Hands up all over. Okay, thank you. Now, St. John's folks, how many of you can remember when you couldn't walk for coffee hour in that back room and there were so many kids that we put them all upstairs? A few. Okay, we got a few. It took you all a minute when we had 3 choirs or something. Church must have gone for 4 hours. 4 choirs. I stand corrected. How many of you 10 years ago never would have thought you'd end up in this place today? See, there's change. We've all gone through an incredible amount of change, and those changes do have grief attached. It might not be grief where we're crying and sobbing and going into our bedroom and pulling the blankets over our heads and not coming out. That's usually what we think of when we say the word grief. But grief looks very different for different people at different times. So today I want us to get on the island with Gilligan, and we're going to look at all of the characters. There's only 7, because they've all got to be in grief, right? They're shipwrecked. They're not going home. They're all stuck there together. They've had a huge change in their lives. How do they handle the grief? And let's see, maybe you'll see yourself as we talk about these characters. So the one I want to start with is Skipper. I always thought Skipper was mad most of the time, and turns out I was wrong. He's actually quite jovial in most of the episodes, but what I remember is when he would get so mad at Gilligan, he would take off his hat, stand up, Gary, no, I'm just kidding, and whack Gilligan with the hat, and he would just have steam coming out of his ears, he'd just be so mad. That's what I remember about the Skipper. Now, anger is part of grief. It is a way that the grief comes out, and sometimes it comes out at the worst possible times. It is part of those cycles of grief, if you're familiar with those, and I don't want to go into that today, but some of the things that I describe you'll recognize from the grief cycles. Anger is part of grief, and some of us go straight to mad. Like, we don't even stop for a tear, we're just furious. So that's the first one. Maybe you see yourself there. The next character is the professor, and I just love the professor because he sees something that needs to be fixed, repaired, or done, and he does it. He puts the committee in place, he sets the agenda, he gets the minutes, he gives everybody their tasks, and he does the job. We need professors. We need them. We need folks that can do all that. So what's the catch? For the professor, you can be so distracted by trying to fix all the problems that you don't think for a moment about what you need, about the grief you're feeling. You don't give yourself a chance to just sit with it and feel it, as we learned in our second reading today, that the only thing you can do when you're grieving is grieve. You have to make a little space for it. So that's the danger for the professor types. They get distracted to the point they're not paying attention to how their heart's feeling. Marianne is similar. Everybody loves Marianne, right? She's this sweet little Midwestern girl with the very, very short shorts. And she has a heart for everybody. She loves everybody. She just wants to make sure that you and you and you and you are all taken care of. And so she ends up doing all the cooking and all the laundry for everybody on the island. Did you know that? I did not remember that, but I did. Once I started to think about it, she is a caregiver, and she processes her grief while she's caring for you because she sees what you need and she notices you. And of course, the danger for Marianne is similar to the danger for the professor, that you are so overwhelmed with what everybody else needs that you don't notice what you need. Or you push your needs down and you concentrate on everybody else until eventually, and this does happen to Marianne, she loses her cool. And here and there in those episodes, Marianne is not happy. It has to come out. The grief has to come out somewhere. So if you're a Marianne, thank you. We need Mariannes. Oh my goodness, we need you so bad. But take some time off and take some time for you. Now, Ginger is an enigma. She is clearly in denial. This is another one of those grief cycles that we see. She only started out on a 3-hour tour, but somehow she has enough hairspray and makeup to last for 3 years. She is walking around this uncharted island with evening gowns, jewelry, and high heels. She is disconnected from where she's at. She's good at comedy, though, so that's all right. We'll keep her in there. But she is not paying attention at all to what's happened. She's not living in that moment. She's off somewhere else, and a lot of the time she doesn't know what the problem is. And she's always a little bit of an actor. She's always acting her part. She never lets the facade slip, and she doesn't let us see the real her. Maybe we have some Gingers in here. Now the Howells, they're interesting. Mr. and Mrs. Howell. Mr. Howell is an opportunist. He is going to make money whether he is stuck on an island with 6 other people or whether he's at home. Doesn't make any difference to him. He is only about one thing. He loves a good idea, and when people get together and they say, this is what we need to do, let's have a sauerkraut supper. And you can do this, Mr. Howell. You can go to the store and get whatever paper goods we need. And he'll say, okay, but I got to go to my hut first. And then we never see him again because he doesn't ever do any of the work. He always says, that's a great idea. We should do that. And then he doesn't participate. Now, I'm not sure if he's grieving or if he's just an extra in the cast. I've never been able to figure that out. But he should be grieving, but he's not. His mind is always on making money. And his wife, Lovey, he calls her Lovey, she's just a cheerleader. She's sort of a prop. And we do need cheerleaders. We do need them. Simon Sinek would call Mrs. Howell an early adapter. She is going to see the new thing. She'll be the first one in line to try it as long as she doesn't get her hands dirty. But she'll do it just because it's new, and she likes that. We need some of those too. The folks who are, going to throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks kind of people. We need you too. But don't be so busy doing those things that you don't realize that there's a lot of grief that we've carried here. We can't live life without grief. Everybody has it. Now, the last person we need to look at, of course, is Gilligan. He's the one, Bob Denver kind of made the show. And I think it is because no matter what circumstance he's in, Whether he's at the bottom of the wave or he's at the top of the wave or he's crashed on the beach, all Gilligan wants is to be loved and accepted and part of the group. He is that lovable doofus, and everybody loves him, even though he drives you crazy sometimes. But all he wants is to be loved and accepted. And that, I think, represents all of us. We're all here because we want to be part of something. When Bert was speaking and we had the list of all of the missions, that's only some of them. That's not all of the Westminster Presbyterian missions that came. So we all want to be part, and there's plenty of places here for you to connect and be part of so that you can feel that love and acceptance that we need, especially in times like this, in times when many of us are grief-stricken, and it is so difficult to know what to do. So what should we do? We're riding the wave. When we get to the top, we get a gasp of hope and we say, oh, God loves us. It's going to be okay. And then we start going down that wave again, and then it repeats. Or we see ourselves in those characters and we think, okay, that's where I am today, but who knows what I'll be tomorrow. How do we keep from sliding down that wave like the author of Lamentations did without judging other people? How do we process our grief and grieve without pointing a finger at our neighbor who has a political sign in their yard that's not the person we voted for? How do we stop ourselves from saying at the first glimpse of something not good, what's going to stop us from saying, I told you all so, why didn't you listen to me? I know my friends from book club last night are ready to say that to people. They can almost hardly wait. That's not a productive way to deal with our grief. So there's one thing we can do, and it kept us watching Gilligan's Island every day for, I don't know, it was probably on TV for 20 years. I actually can't believe that you two are not able to remember Gilligan's Island. Even Evelyn could sing the song, so there's that. There's one thing that kept us going, that kept us watching, one thing that kept the characters going, and it was curiosity. How can we get off this island? How can we keep going? How can Jill help, or how can Gloria help, or how can Latasha help? How can we work together to move forward? And when we stay in curiosity and we ask one another questions, we cannot judge them. And that means maybe having some difficult conversations with family members who voted for the other person and just saying, tell me why you felt that was important. Help me see that you're human just like me and you're not my enemy. So today I want to leave you with a question, and it's a super easy question. I want you all to ask each other, when we're finished, you don't have to do it right now, ask each other what character that I described best fits where you are today. And I will start by telling you that according to my husband, I am the skipper. I have a little bit of an anger problem, and on Wednesday or Thursday he said to me something like, boy, you are cussing a lot today. And I said, I am just mad, I'm angry, I'm emotional, I'm upset, just let me be mad. You don't have to fix this for me. I don't want you to fix this, I just need to be mad. So he took the two dogs, he put them in the car, and they went to Dairy Queen for pup cups. He's a wise man, I'm telling you. And left me in the house so that I could be mad. I'm a fast burn though. I'm a fast burn. By the time they got back, I was fine. I was out walking out in the woods and I was getting my head in the right place. But we all process things a little bit differently, and grief does not often look like tears. Maybe it looks more like these other characters we talked about. So ask one another, what character are you? Enjoy it. Have some fun with it. Practice curiosity here, because if you don't practice it in here, you won't be able to do it out there. So what character are you?